Welcome back to the channel. La Rochelle against Leinster. Heading into the weekend, I think this was the pick of the matches for the opening round of the Champions Cup. It's just finished and that's what I'm talking about in this video. So drop a comment down below, let me know what you made of it. Also like the video and subscribe to the channel. This is the first match specific review that I'm actually doing on the channel since the Rugby World Cup finals. So if you do want to see more of them for the domestic game, Champions Cup, Premiership, whatever it might be, then you can comment down below as well. But let's get into it. So tomorrow on Monday, I'm going to try and do a Champions Cup review overall, but I thought this game, a rematch of last year's final, two just brilliant teams who've delivered some incredible matches over the last few years. I thought this was worth a review in itself. So that's the reason that I'm focusing on this game in the video. Lots to get into. You know how they say that the Champions Cup is the closest to international test match standard that you get in club rugby? I think we've seen that across the weekend actually, and I thought this was quite a good example of why that's the case again in this match in particular, because it was intense, it was physical, the conditions played their part, which maybe meant it wasn't quite as much of a spectacle as we might have been hoping. It was quite a scrappy game, which I'll get onto in just a second. But also in terms of international rugby and it being a standard of international rugby, even though this is a pool game, it had a feel of a knockout game to me. And again, we've probably seen that a little bit this weekend. We've seen drop goals and that kind of tense sort of rugby that we saw more in the knockout stages of the World Cup. But it was one of my takeaways when watching this game, particularly in the opening phases, the intensity of it, some of the hits, just the kind of the feel to the game. It had a different feel to it. And that, I suppose, is what people mean when they talk about it being closer to international standard. But as I say, it was enthralling. It wasn't necessarily as, I guess, exciting is probably the best word, as some of the games we've seen previously. I mean, that's pretty hard to be. The final last year, people arguably say, is one of the best Champions Cup finals that we've ever seen. So this was still a great game. The conditions, as I say, did have an impact on the sort of match we saw. There were a lot of mistakes. It was stop-start. But it was still great entertainment that even going into the closing stages, you weren't sure which team was going to win it. I absolutely loved watching it. And before I get into the game itself, I suppose I was watching it and thinking, there feels like a rivalry between these two teams now. I know they've met in the latter stages of the competition in the last few years, and La Rochelle have beaten Leinster in some brilliant matchups. But to me, it felt like a match that has a bit of genuine rivalry to it. There was angst, there was tension, there was pushing and shoving, and the teams kind of getting under each other's skin. From that point of view, I absolutely loved it, and I hope maybe that we'll see them in the latter stages of this competition again, because they are still two very, very good teams. And I suppose from a Leinster point of view, getting the victory on the road in France, there's a psychological element to this. Now, on the one hand, this doesn't make up for the defeat in the final last year or the defeats that Leinster have had to La Rochelle previously. It also doesn't mean that if, for example, these two sides met in the latter stages of the competition this season, that Leinster would definitely win it. But I do just wonder whether it's a significant win for Leinster as a club psychologically. It's the sort of thing that players and coaches probably play down because they know week to week it could be different. It could be a different result if they happen to meet each other next week. But to me, as an outsider looking in, it feels meaningful for Leinster to get this victory, in particular on the road in France. The crowd were right into it in tough conditions. I think it is an important psychological hurdle just for them to have under their cap, if you like, for them to have under their belt as we can do this, we can front up against this team and we can still get it done. But it was a game of really fine margins. I noted a few down as we got to the latter stages. They were littered throughout the game, moments which you thought could be a big moment. But La Rochelle missing a 3 on 65 minutes was a key moment. 74 minutes, La Rochelle deciding to kick for the corner. They subsequently lose the line out. They will feel that there was a Leinster hand in there on the arm. They might have had a point there, but my point is, it was a game of fine margins. That makes it so entertaining when these two teams meet each other, because you genuinely feel like it could go either way. It's what makes it feel like knockout rugby. Going back to the point that I made at the start of the video, is those small margins, those fine moments. It was something that I think I mentioned a lot throughout the World Cup and being out in France. Those big games between the best sides, you feel like it's on a knife edge, and there are these small moments in games that you look back on and they end up having a big impact on it. So those were two towards the end, and we'll come back to La Rochelle in just a moment, where they maybe missed a few things and it ends up not going their way. But in terms of Leinster, huge amount to be pleased about. Keeping La Rochelle under 10 points in La Rochelle away from home, not letting them score a try. And again, I know I've mentioned it already that the conditions probably contributed towards that. It was a low scoring game. It meant that penalties were at a bit of a premium and you had to go for posts when you had those opportunities. But I think those are two things for Leinster that are key. And I suppose reverting back to that psychological element a little bit, going toe-to-toe with this team, again, away from home, a team that if we look at those narrow victories that La Rochelle have had over Leinster, you feel like in the Champions Cup final last year, in the year before that when they lost, La Rochelle had a physical edge and a physical dominance, particularly in the final quarter of games, that Leinster weren't able to deal with. And I know that La Rochelle's scrum was pretty good on occasion this weekend, but I think Leinster still met that challenge in a better way. And I think that's going to be incredibly pleasing for them when that has been such an issue. It's always what's been levelled at this team, hasn't it? Of when they come up against a really beefy physical pack, of which La Rochelle have had arguably the strongest pack in club rugby. When they come up against that, they haven't necessarily had the answers when silverware's on the line, when the pressure's on the line late on in the season. So big plus points for Leinster. I'd imagine their fans watching this, you're going to be pretty delighted. And also, Frowley with the kick right at the end, 55-metre penalty. When they opted for the post, I was thinking, oh, this is dangerous. If he doesn't have the legs here, it's going to hand the ball back to La Rochelle. Why don't you kick to the corner? By that point, when you've got a line out, it'll just be seconds left to milk out the clock, and then you can kick it out. But what a kick at the end of the game, stretching that lead. 55 metres in the driving rain. It was miserable conditions. But from a Leinster point of view, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. From a La Rochelle point of view, to finish the video on them, as good as Leinster were and as good a victory this is for Leinster, I think La Rochelle will look at it and feel like they were not at their best. I think there was a lack of accuracy. I mentioned the 2 points there in terms of missing the 3. Okay, that happens. But also a lack of execution. It felt to me at least that they managed to get themselves into that 22 on enough occasions that they would back themselves to come away with more points than they did when they only got 9 across the whole game. So I think there was a lack of accuracy there from La Rochelle. But actually, the most concerning thing, a lack of composure. I suppose that's linked to a lack of accuracy in that they didn't execute where they needed to in the red zone. But more than that, a lack of composure in their attitude to the game. I suppose it was a tough game, and I think it was a tough game to officiate for the referee. But La Rochelle were appealing decisions. They got told off multiple times. It felt like they were losing their heads. It felt like to me that they were losing the emotional side of the game in quite a detrimental way to themselves. They weren't able to keep their composure, which then I think would have impacted their performances. It was something that was picked up in the TNT coverage that I was watching. They made that point on commentary. Interesting to see if you will all agree. But yeah, I think that would be something that La Rochelle, given that they're the 2 times back-to-back European champions, a star-studded squad full of internationals, at home as well. It's not even like they're away from home and you've got the crowd on your back and you feel like everything's not going your way. You're having opportunities in the game to lose your composure, I think is a massive shame from their point of view, because who knows, if you keep that composure, maybe you're able to execute in a different way. Ifs, buts and maybes, but that was a big thing for me. And as I've hinted at already and said already, the missed opportunities that they left out there. So a great game, maybe not the sort of match we were expecting. We were maybe expecting a little bit more of a spectacle on paper at least, but it was still enthralling, I thought, incredibly entertaining, and a great win for Leinster. As I say, on Monday I'll do a look back, a more general look back where I'll mention multiple different games of the Champions Cup over the weekend. So drop a comment down below on this one. La Rochelle against Leinster. Let me know what you made of it. Like the video as well and make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.